Welcome to the Deal Doctor Livestream. That's an example of when to keep your mouth shut. Anyway, we're going to talk a little bit today about when we should not engage, not share too much information. And Tracy, let's start with one of the examples that you gave shortly before we came on here. Go for it.
Yeah, I love the example of you are hosting an open house, or you bring your buyers through an open house, and the listing agent is standing there. And, you know, as the buyer's agent, you're trying to learn as much information as you can in this crazy market to give your buyers an edge. So you might engage in a conversation with the listing agent, and we probably all can point to examples like this. But the example I give is, during this conversation, you might learn from the listing agent while you're standing with your buyer that the house is pretty messy, you know, so kind of look past it. The sellers are getting a divorce. So you might think, wow, that was good information to know. You know, it's like, yes, I'll excuse the mess. But what I really gleaned from that is, hey, this house might be on sale. I saw the flag outside waving that said, there's a divorce happening here. Kind of think of it as a fire sale. So I'm thinking about the advantage that I may now have for my buyer.
Yeah, and I think that holds true in all of those open house situations where you have somebody walk in and they say, what's the reason for, why are they moving? Or what's the, what are they going to, what's the price they will take? You know, what are they willing to go to? Well, you might know that information. Your seller may have said to you, the bottom line that we have is such and such. You don't have the right to share that information with that buyer at all, under any circumstance. Would you agree, Eric?
Definitely. It's amazing when we see agents trying to be very helpful because we all want to get along. We all want to try to be friends with other agents, but we really forget the mindset of, you know, our primary responsibility is to our client, not to the other side that we're trying to appeal to. So we just need to be very mindful what information you truly are giving out, because it may be a detriment to your client.
So if I'm standing in an open house for my seller and a buyer walks in and they see something that might tip them off to the reason that the seller is selling, like maybe the house is mostly empty, and they probe and they ask about it, hey, why are the closets all empty? What's the response that we should have? Tracy?
Well, again, we have to think about, who we represent. And in that case, you're the listing agent standing at the open house. But you just need to explain to them that you're not at liberty to discuss where the seller is at or at what point, anything that's happening in the transaction. It's outside of the information that they would have available to share with the buyer at that moment.
Now, have we ever run into, I know the answer to this, by the way, but have we ever run into a situation where a buyer makes a decision in a competitive environment? There are a bunch of offers and they make a decision on a Thursday, they win the offer, and suddenly over the weekend, something changes. Have we ever run into that? How many?
No, never.
Never. Question
All the time.
How many times? Yes.
Yeah.
How many times per weekend?
Yeah.
So it may be a situation where I know I've seen it where a couple comes in, buys a house, wins the offer, and then they get into a spat over the weekend, and lo and behold, they don't want to buy the house anymore. And unfortunately, the contract didn't have the clause that said, unless they get into a spat over the weekend. So now the agent wants to share some information to try to get them out of the contract. Is this a good approach, or what would you do, Eric, in this situation where you're faced with that? Eric?
I would keep my mouth shut, right?
Of course you would.
That was beautiful.
You get a performance medal for that one. Anyway, yeah, that's a tough one because, again, we want to be helpful. We want everybody to play nice in the sandbox. And we want the listing agent to understand that this has just been a traumatic event for the buyer. They're going through a lot of stuff, but is it appropriate to suggest or hint or say, expressly that the buyer got into a spat over the weekend and now they don't want him to buy the house? And the answer is no, no, absolutely not. So in that event, Tracy, what should an agent do to protect their buyer and to try to get them out of the contract?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you think about it as that circle of trust. Anything that happens inside that relationship is inside the margins of the paper. The listing agent is on the outside of the margins of the paper. So anything regarding the relationship has to stay inside of that. So any personal information about what's happening in that buyer's life is really not information that should be shared with the other side. So you're going to point back to your contract at all times. Look at the details of it. What does it say regarding your inspection contingency? Did this argument happen the night before that inspection contingency was ended? Has it already ended? Are you still within that time period? So always point to your contract. Use that. That is your Bible. It tells you exactly what you should be doing. So, and then from that point, if you're well within, with the example that you gave of this argument that maybe happened, if you're within your inspection contingency, then you're going to respond appropriately. At 5 Star Real Estate, that means a 2-step process. 1 is to cancel the contract by way of addendum. 2 is the award of the earnest money deposit. Nothing more. Not, hey, Bob and Sue got in an argument last night and Sue's leaving, so they can't buy the house together, so I'm going to need to cancel the contract in a 2-step process. Nope, you've already waived that. That ship sailed, because now they know that the reason you're getting out is not because the roof is older than they thought, or that the furnace was bad, or some defect was discovered that basically caused them to change their mind. No, this was for a personal reason, which has absolutely nothing to do with the contract.
Yeah,
I know-
and if you are past your inspection period, now you're dealing with a lender contingency, and all purchase agreements have lender contingencies. So that makes it a little more tricky, because it just doesn't mean that just because the 2 people split up and one says, well, hey, I'm not moving forward on this purchase agreement anymore. Well, of course, that's probably going to blow up the deal. You're going to get a lender denial, which will help strengthen your case. But if you were to tell them in advance, hey, my couple split up and one of them just tanked their credit, well, that's now could be a potential problem, because that could have been avoided. And if someone were to sue the other couple, a judge may rule in the favor of that seller, saying, hey, buyers, you screwed up here. You didn't move forward in good faith on this. You had a relationship issue. That's not an out for the purchase agreement. It doesn't say in there that buyer can terminate if both parties have a falling out. Now, someone could put that in there, right? You could put anything in there, but you just got to be careful. If you were representing that couple that split up, you don't want to explain that to the other side at this point. You just need to be cordial, try to figure out, talk with the lender to see whether they can still move forward. Maybe one of them still wants to move forward. And if only one moves forward, then you send over an addendum saying, hey, we're going to remove such and such buyers from this purchase agreement, but we're still moving forward. So you don't know what's going to happen yet. So I encourage all agents, don't do the classic knee-jerk reaction to situations. Give yourself some time, figure out how these things are going to play out, figure out all your options before you even reach out to the other side. That's my 2 cents.
Take a beat, take a breath, kind of collect your thoughts. I want to go back to something that Tracy said about the 2-step process. Can we walk through that just a moment? Because I know that a lot of agents out there are still using just the mutual release to terminate a contract. And I want to spend a little bit of time on that, if we may. I just had it the other day where another broker pushed back and said that, no, we don't need to sign the addendum portion of it, only the mutual release, when we submitted two documents. And the reason for it is that within certain purchase agreements, it gives the buyer the right to terminate the contract based on inspections, for example, or a low appraisal. And right at that moment, that buyer has a unilateral right to terminate that contract. The seller doesn't have any right to deny that termination. Where we get into a problem is that the mutual release, if you only submit the mutual release, it requires a signature of acceptance by both the other party as well as the brokers before it is enforceable, right, Eric?
Correct.
Okay, so if we're dealing with a unilateral termination, the addendum, then we don't have to, we've done our duty to terminate the contract for the buyer. With that addendum, the mutual release is only about who gets the EMD, right?
Yeah, and a lot of times with unilateral terminations, we don't care whether the other side agrees or not.
Right.
We're telling them it's done.
Right, right. You're providing notice of that termination.
That's
Yeah.
correct.
Now, let's say that one of the parties, doesn't matter which one, but one of the parties says, no, I'm not going to agree to that mutual release. What now? What happens to that mutual, the EMD? Even if the buyer has every right to terminate that contract unilaterally, what happens to the EMD, Eric?
Yeah. So there's a couple things that can happen here. One, we know that until both parties can agree to how that EMD is released, it's going to sit with the title company, with the broker, or whoever it's going to be held by. It's going to sit there until both parties can agree, or one party sues the other. Now, there's even a third option. It sits there for 3 years, and the title company or the broker turns it over to the state, Michigan, through interpleader. And then basically, no one ends up getting it because it gets basically used up for attorney fees and everything else that people, when they do try to go get it, you end up losing it, from what I hear from attorneys. So the biggest way to try to ensure that the money is released is to both parties to agree. If it means you split it down the middle or do something so that you get something, something's going to be better than nothing, because eventually, if you can't agree, good luck. And even going in small claims doesn't automatically award you this. We've seen judges who are out of their mind.
Well,
you don't know what they're going to do.
You're right, you don't. But I think the important thing about that is we all have to remember, agents have to be aware of it and clear about it, that when there is a dispute regarding an EMD, even though that buyer has every right to terminate that contract due to inspection results, even if they go that far and do everything right, if there is a dispute, if that seller disputes that and says, don't release that money, I want to fight it in court, we have to be neutral parties as it regards that earnest deposit, right?
Yeah, so keep in mind with EMD being released as the neutral party whoever is holding that EMD, they have to follow escrow law. It's completely different than real estate law. They have their own occupational codes and laws that escrow agents need to follow. And we see so many times where attorneys say, well, it's written in the purchase agreement. Well, who cares, attorney? Go back to law school or go look up the occupational code to see what it means for escrow holders. So yes, I've had to have those fights, and I kind of enjoy that. So
Yep. And I think going back to the addendum is that we have to be clear in the language in the addendum. I think, Don, you probably just said it, something as simple as a buyer hereby terminates the contract based on inspections. Boom, that's it. Buyer hereby terminates the contract based on appraisal, if your purchase agreement says that. But just as simply put as possible, you don't need any other language. What are you trying to accomplish?
Yeah.
Boom, get their signature, fire it over with the EMD addendum that says, this is who gets it. This is who is awarded, the earnest money deposit that's being held by the escrow holder.
Yeah, and Tracy makes a great point, agents, when you are terminating, reference the purchase agreement section, according to section blank, buyer hereby terminates the agreement. Yep. So that people understand why you're terminating.
Yeah, and we run into it often where agents will call us and say, here's my language to terminate an addendum or terminate a contract, an addendum that says buyer hereby terminates because the well and septic inspection didn't pass muster, and there was a broken switch plate cover on the wall, and the furnace didn't work, and there's this whole laundry list of stuff. And to go back to what Tracy just said, it's as simple as buyer hereby terminates contract based on the inspections noted in paragraph 15, for example.
Yeah,
it's simple.
Yeah.
Don't avoid getting into a situation where you're trying to explain too much and it opens the door to potential disputes over the contract.
Right. At the end of the day, you're not asking the seller to make corrections. You're asking the seller to release you. So stick to the contract.
Yeah. I want to cover just one more thing. When we get to discussing things and talking about what, avoiding having a conversation that is unnecessary, or in this particular case, illegal. When we get into dual agency, first of all, I will repeat, as I've said so many times, avoid dual agency at every possibility. It will very often lead to situations which are very, very dangerous, and the agent will find themselves either in a grievance committee or in a lawsuit because they have advocated for one side more than the other, for example, or at least that's the accusation. So when we're going down this road, though, where let's pretend that dual agency has been unavoidable. It's your brother-in-law's house for sale and your college roommates buying the house. You've got allegiance to both of them. So therefore you should have allegiance to neither of them, correct? How do we walk down that road when it comes to issues like inspections or appraisals or the very information that we're talking about here today?
You're simply a courier of information. You're not offering opinion or advice. You are simply a courier. Okay, you've got your pen in hand. What would you like me to say? How would you like, you're not offering advice. You can't, because you can't be impartial to either party.
Eric, would you agree?
Yeah, it puts you in a position where you can't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine being in a dual agency position and not being able to really give advice to anyone. I look at this and go, well, why am I even here?
Mm-hmm.
I can't do anything for anyone.
Right.
I can't give advice. You have to tell me, buyer, what you want to convey to the seller. And better yet, that even puts you in a dangerous position, because normally when you're communicating with any conversation, it should be a three-way conference call, always, or in face, no matter what. You should not be talking to one party over the other, because that can even get you in trouble. So don't do it.
Yeah.
Dual agency means that every time you talk, it's always going to be a three-way phone conference.
So let me throw this out. In this situation where when an agent is faced with the prospect of doing dual agency, you've got a seller that you have allegiance to and a buyer that you have allegiance to. Wouldn't it be smarter to say to both parties and get them to sign a document that says, as it regards this transaction, I am going to be a transaction coordinator. I will not provide advice. I will not advocate for either party. I am going to be nothing but a pen and paper and put down whatever it is you all agree to. Wouldn't that be a safer position where no agency position is declared, either as a dual agent or as a seller's agent or buyer's agent, to be nothing but a scribe? Wouldn't that be a safer position?
It sure would be. I would highly encourage that, because it will prevent you from showing favoritism or having one party believe that you showed favoritism with merit or without merit, and then getting thrown into a grievance or being sued. And the problem is, if you are in dual agency, you better hope that you have all of your documents in place. You better hope that you performed your agency disclosure properly, once as a seller, once with the buyer, and a third folder as dual agency, and then have that dual agency agreement in place. If you miss any of these steps, you're now in non-disclosed dual agency. And if you do get sued, you will lose all of your commission.
Okay.
And then some.
Just for a moment, can you walk through that process? I've got a buyer under an agency contract. I have to have that buyer agency contract signed. Got a seller under an agency contract, listing contract. Okay.
Yep.
Now you have allegiance to both of them. If you're going to go into dual agency, which we recommend against, But if you do, what's the next step?
Well, the next step would be the agency disclosure for the third time,
Mhm.
but as a dual agent. And
Now-
that's so important. It's so the agency disclosure, you've already disclosed one time when you were with the listing component side of it. You
Correct.
already disclosed it one time as a buyer's agent, but
Correct.
you are now required, if you go into dual agency, to disclose it a third time, but as a dual agent, and ensure that both the buyer and seller acknowledge.
And there's another
Then you
document.
need to get a dual agency agreement. Because think of it this way. The agreement hires you as the agent. Just because you disclose that, hey, I'm going to be a dual agent, they're not hiring you. You have to have an agreement in place to ensure how you're going to be compensated.
Right.
That's
That
why
was,
we have agreements.
right. That was simply the disclosure
Correct.
saying, yeah.
That's a disclosure basically saying, if you hire me, I would act as a dual agent. That's what disclosures are.
Mhm.
Well, and I want to point out that the thing that a lot of agents forget is we have to ask permission. It's not something that we get to dictate. If we're going to go into dual agency, we have to say, is that okay, seller? Is that okay, buyer? And once they nod their head, then we can get the disclosure signed and the dual agency agreement signed before we write up a contract or purchase agreement. We can't do it afterwards. So we have to very careful steps here and deliberate steps. If agents run into this situation, they really should contact us on the Deal Doctor line, broker support, so we can help them walk through this. But the better option, in my view, is just get both parties to agree that you're going to be a transaction coordinator, full transparency, nothing but a pen, and that's the safer position. Would you
Right.
agree?
And that, yeah. And to me, that's in the situation where you have love and affection, I'll say, for both parties, or some type of relationship with each side. But if you're a listing agent and the buyer comes along, again, agents will call and say, well, we're not allowed to do dual agency at 5-Star Real Estate. But that's not entirely true. We will let you do dual agency, but what we're trying to do is keep you out of trouble. And so we know that I always say I begin and end with the person I started with. So when I'm on the listing side, sure, you have an opportunity to meet buyers along the way, but stay in the listing lane, right? Disclose to the buyer, hi, I'm Tracy, I'm the listing agent. On the disclosure, I am the seller's agent, and they are the buyer. 5-Star compensation agreement shows that my loyalty and trust is to the seller, and I'm disclosing to you that, and that we have the $295 broker transaction fee. But I don't owe them the same loyalty that I do to my seller. I've disclosed that to them and avoided dual agency and potentially avoided a lot of legal issues.
Yeah, I totally agree. Really quickly, we're winding down here. I'm looking for questions. I don't see any questions on the Facebook Connect, so I'm going to just ask each of you, if you will, any closing thoughts. Eric?
Well, no, I just highly encourage agents that if you have any questions, reach out to us. We'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. We're here to support the agents, especially if this is the first time and you're not sure or something comes up. It's never a problem if another agent asks you something and you say, you know what, I'm not sure about that. Let me get back to you.
Mm.
Instead of trying to be the know-it-all, which we can't know everything. Just say, you know what, let me get back to you on that. Pick up the phone, call the deal doctors or call broker support, understand what it is that was asked, understand how it best to answer, and do it correctly. Do it honestly, because you also have a code of ethics to follow, and ensure it's the right information. There's nothing more frustrating than dealing with an agent who tells me information that's not accurate. I lose my cool.
Yep.
And now I'm going to keep my mouth shut.
Yep.
Good plan.
Okay.
Tracy?
Good. And the other thing I would just say is keep your conversations to what's in writing. Keep the personal things out of it. It's good idea to have a record because it can never be misconstrued that you said something. We recently had another situation where something was communicated and there were two parts to it, but the part that the listening agent heard was not what needed to be communicated, but it's what's being challenged now. So keep your communication in writing. It will be your friend. Use dot loop to your advantage. We can point to many examples of where things were shared in dot loop. Things are time-stamped and dated. Dot loop is your friend.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for bringing up the issue of getting it in writing. Sometimes agents will get the permission of their sellers to share, what their motivations are for moving, what their situation is, what they might be willing to leave in the transaction. If they do that, and it's not in writing anywhere else, get that permission in writing before you share that information with anyone. So I think we're good for today, unless we have any questions. If you do have questions, please post them on the Facebook Connect site, and we will answer them throughout the day as you watch this video. And thanks for joining, and we'll see you here next week. Thanks.
Thank you.
See ya.